All right, and welcome to today's Lore Chat, everybody. This is for the week of November 7th. Today is Saturday, November 13th. It's about 1 o'clock Honuan time. And we're going to be going into the Lore Chat here in very short order. We have pretty much one main topic to cover here, and it's about lycanthropy in Atheros. If we have some extra time at the end, then we may also touch on a couple other things having to do with some of the different Underdark races in the setting. But I don't think we'll get there. I think we're pretty much just going to be talking about the lycanthropy today. So we have a few questions to go over in regards to the lycanthropy. The first is, generally, how is it created? How did it come about? And then how is it transmitted as well as in different mediums and different lores, different universes. There's different styles of transmission, and that's certainly true in Atheros as well. What kinds of lycanthropy are there? Because there's a couple of different kinds. There's little distinguishments. That's not a word. That I think some people have already seen. And then finally, where do they live? Kind of what's the distribution of lycanthropes like across the continent? And is Honua uncommon in having this big undercity of were-rats? So just kind of to jump into first things first here. When was it created? So in about 1800 Second Era, and we haven't nailed down a lot of the exact years for the prehistory, but it's kind of in the middle of the century. So maybe around 1850, maybe a little sooner, maybe a little later. But during one of the new moons, as you can see here, Luna loses control over herself and surrenders to her darker side. The curse of lycanthropy affects then members of the Freelanders and the Shadow Touched. It's transmitted through bite, and one form is determined by the strongest attribute. So that answers a few of the questions already, but there's really a lot more depth to go into here. So Luna, you may already know, has that background of being kind of a dual-sided god, because she was once alive. She was the daughter of Kane, and everything was good until Kane lost his temper once at a family event and accidentally incinerated his daughter, turned her into ash. Kane had a lot of great powers, but creation was not really one of them. He was more blessed in destruction. So Luna dies, passes on, and she's later reborn by a group of very holy, I guess not very holy, but very dedicated Nair acolytes who would later become holy and rewarded for their service, but that would happen a little later. So Luna dies and is reborn, and like her father, she has a little bit of that hot temper. She has that dark side. It's supposed to be that sort of duality with the moon. There's the dark side, which is supposed to embody kind of like the, I guess, the more primal traits of humankind, humanoids, as evidenced in the wares, right? And the light side is kind of more the compassion, the forgiveness, the more far-sighted and far-minded approach. So this is during one of the new moons. So it's when Luna is on the darker side. It's a more primal time. And one of the things to note here, just kind of what is going on here in the history. Let's see here. Just before and just after. I believe that, yeah. So this is before really the humans, because it says there that it affected the Freelanders and the Shadow Touched. We can go over that a little bit more soon here. But essentially, these people, the Freelanders and the Shadow Touched, they don't have any sort of spiritual leader, if you will, at least not at this time. So as far as expressing those darker sides of themselves, the Shadow Touched being a race that lost their god, Ahuhi-Teroa, who sacrificed himself to save them, and then were also affected by the blackening at Honua Mana. And then the Freelanders as well, who escaped slavery and oppression by Veshta, the evil ice queen to the north in the Grand Tier Peninsula, only to fall prey to their own debauchery and slave trades once they got into the south. So, because this was before the Bork would come around and basically point out the irony and say, we've got to stop this and create the Bellhold. So you have these darker sides to both of these races without any sort of spiritual guidance, if you will. So they are the ones that are more or less most affected by this loss of control by Luna. The new moon surges and just creates this powerful curse within members of the Freelanders and members of the Shadow Touched. So it starts really with just these two racial groups, who are located mostly in the central Horseshoe Plains. I guess we can pop up that map for just a brief moment here. You can see here, just above where it says Bellhold Bork, kind of between the mountains of the north and the mountains to the south. Oh, okay. Oh, sorry, I guess this is just on the recording. Let me pop this over here. Yeah, I'm just going to have to change the screen share on the Discord. Wow, that's going to share my whole OBS window. Okay, so I'm just going to open up the map as well then, because I feel like that will probably be the best way. That way everybody who's live with me right now can see it as well. Okay. So here we are. If you look here at this area, kind of titled Bellhold Bork, between the mountains to the north and the mountains to the south, that's essentially the northern Horseshoe Plains. And that's where the Freelanders lived, and they still live, but just as a different people group. This to the north, the Grand Tier Peninsula, this is where the Freelanders once lived. They escaped the oppression of the evil Ice Queen Veshta, to live in the mountains and then later escape down to the south. The Shadow Touched, meanwhile, lived kind of in the center there around the ruins of the Great Iron Keep when it was still the Great Iron Keep. But after the keep fell, they became the Shadow Touched and kind of inhabited the eastern central Horseshoe Plains and also the south central Horseshoe Plains, stretching all the way down to Honua Mana, which is a city down at the very tip of one of the southern peninsulas there. That city was visited by an Endbringer, and the Shadow Touched were cursed by that as well. So the Shadow Touched are really like a twice cursed people. A lot of bad stuff just keeps happening to them. But this vertical strip right here along the, I guess this would be the eastern Horseshoe Plains, this is where lycanthropy kind of initially took hold, the peoples who lived around here. So I think that's a pretty good synopsis of how it was created. Luna was going through one of her dark cycles on the new moon, and it was so powerful that it cursed some of the people in this region who were already spiritually guideless and untethered, and were susceptible to that sort of influence. So they just kind of fell prey to their more primal bestial natures, and then it just kind of became permanent. And there you have it. So that's how it was created. How is it transmitted then, right? Because we've got these lycanthropes, and they can't transform back into their human form, right? Or I guess you could say their true form. This is their new true form. Their old humanoid form, it's gone with the wind. So they are, and this kind of ties in with the next question as well. What kinds of lycanthropy are there, and how is it transmitted? They're what you would call a pureblood lycanthrope in Atheros, because they cannot transform back into their original form, or they didn't have an original form. In fact, these first lycanthropes, all of whom are probably dead by now, just because of lifespans, these original lycanthropes were like a third kind of lycanthrope, right? But we don't really even need to go into that because it's not relevant. How did they transmit it? Well, if they have children with another pureblood lycanthrope, then they have pure-blooded children. If they just bite somebody else, right, like, then that person is a hybrid, just like a lot of the people in the city are right now. You've been bit either by a pureblood or by a hybrid, and you are now a hybrid lycanthrope. Now, that being said, if you're bit by a pureblood, your lycanthropy is a lot harder to remove, as people are already discovering. You need to slay and consume the flesh of a unicorn. I believe it's on the new moon when your transformation is occurring. So, I mean, the unicorn blood is the only thing that's pure enough to dispel that level of a curse. If you're bit by a hybrid, remove curse, no problem. But if you're bit by a pure blood, that's another story. It takes some serious doing to undo that. And of course, killing a unicorn is just an inherently evil act in and of itself. So you're kind of just like trading one curse for another down the line. Now for later, as they would say in Atheros. Pretty common. As for if a pureblood and a hybrid have a child, that child will be a pureblood. So purebloods and purebloods, that will be a pure-blooded lycanthrope. Purebloods and hybrids, that will also be a pure-blooded lycanthrope. But if a pureblood and if a pureblood and a normal humanoid, or a hybrid and a normal humanoid have a child, then that child will just be a hybrid. I would say that their curse is probably also under the same pure-blooded thing. If you're born a lycan, even if you're only half lycan, you got to go bathe in unicorn blood to get rid of it. You can't just get removed curse. Your parent, maybe, if they were just a normal hybrid who was bit by a hybrid. But yeah, I could probably make some sort of flow chart for this that would make it like less confusing. I'm going to just put that right here. Bite flow chart. What kind of lycan am I? Because a couple people have already asked to start with lycanthropic characters, either born lycan or bit and cursed. So having that bite flow chart will certainly be easier in communicating that information to everybody. But at least it's now out there for folks. It just might take a little bit of doing until we get that flow chart built up to communicate that. So that's how it's transmitted. You're either through birth or through bite. You can't get it by just sharing a drink with the lycanthrope. You have to actually bite you. It has to be like a bodily fluid exchange, to use biological terms. So there's that. That's how it's transmitted. As for the kinds of lycanthropy there are, kind of already covered this a bit in the previous question, but just to go in depth into it, there's that first kind, right? We could call them, I don't know, the originals. There's probably some way cooler term that I could be using, right? Like the primes or something like that. But there's the first ones who were first cursed by Luna way back in the day. So that's one kind of werewolf. The ones who were originally cursed, they had a humanoid form at one point, but they lost that humanoid form, and they are now just a werewolf all the time. Okay, so that's one kind, but again, irrelevant to where we are right now in the histories. The kinds that really matter are the purebloods and the hybrids. The purebloods, again, that's if you were born to two werewolf parents when you were conceived, I guess, or that's it. Yeah, that's actually it. That's the only way to be a pureblood. You cannot be bitten and become a pureblood. The only way to be a pureblood is if you are born a pureblood. And at least within the Moon Clan, there is certainly some tension between purebloods and hybrids and the old order and the new order. Basically, the tension over how the clan views and treats these different kinds of lycans. That's the crux of the friction kind of in their different political groups right now, as far as Granny's group and her loyalists to the old ways, and Umber's group and his loyalists to the new ways. But so to be a pureblood, you have to be born one. And then to be a hybrid, you can either be bit by a pureblood, bit by a hybrid, or you can be the child of a single lycan parent. So maybe one of your parents was a lycan, and one was not when they fell in love, and then they had you or whatever, or when they just met in the bar, I don't know, whatever people do. And then, whatever. From there, they stayed that way. One's always humanoid, one's always lycan. Maybe one became a lycan later so that they could kind of be part of the lycan family. But if one of your parents was not a lycan when you were conceived, then you are a hybrid. You'll always be a hybrid. If you were bit by a pureblood, you're a hybrid. You'll always be a hybrid. If you were bit by a hybrid, you're a hybrid. You'll always be a hybrid. And again, there's that special way of removing your curse if you are a hybrid who's been bit by a pureblood. You have to bathe in the unicorn blood in your form after having slaughtered and eaten its flesh on the new moon. Fun stuff. It's PG-13, I swear. They did it in Harry Potter, so I'm well within my boundaries. Okay. So that's the kinds of lycanthropy there are and how it's transmitted. Although, really, I think that now is a good time to go into really the second part of that question. Because those are the major types of lycanthropy, right? But then there's also a were-boar, and were-rat, and were-bear, and were-owl, were-wolf, were-tiger. In order to explain these properly, we have to make sure that you first understand the difference between the purebloods and the hybrids. So now that we've got that, I think we'll be good to go. Looking back here at the... hang on a second. Oh, hang on. Okay, whatever. I won't go back to the document right now. We'll just leave it here for now. But anyways, looking back at the document, I can do it over here still. Maybe. Nope, never mind. Okay. Let me at least pull up my notes. So if you review the document, or if you were reading along with where we were previously, you could see that the form that you would take according to the curse, whether you're a boar, a rat, a bear, an owl, a wolf, or a tiger, is according to your highest ability score. Now, this is only for purebloods. Got to make that clear. It's only for purebloods, okay? So if you, like those first ones that were cursed, and all of the pure-blooded lycan children, if your highest statistic is strength, you're a were-boar. If your highest statistic is dex, you're a were-rat. Highest statistic is constitution, you're a were-bear. Highest statistic is intelligence, you're a were-owl. Highest ability score is wisdom, you're a were-wolf. And if your highest ability score is charisma, you are a were-tiger. Now, keep in mind that, when you're born, your ability scores can change over time, right? We assume that Luna's magic, the curse knows kind of where you'll settle, right? Like, okay, so for most of your adult life, or as an adventurer, or whatever, or when you're making your character, really is what it boils down to. What is that highest stat? So that's more or less how it's split up. Again, so if you're you know what? Hey, I can just do this. Do. Now you guys can see it. Huh. Okay. Oh, but there, now you can. Huh. What, they can't? But it's sharing that screen. Ah, no, it's just sharing that picture on the screen. Okay, well. Do. These people can see it now. Now let me make sure that the Discord people can see it. Okay, there we go. Now you can see it. All right, so you can see there it's got that split up, which makes it a little bit easier to see. And then it also has right there, one's form is determined by the strongest attribute. Oops. Oh, geez. I just, sorry about that, everybody. Opened up one of my old streams, accidentally clicked on a link. Okay. So you can see there that it says one's form is determined by the strongest attribute. And again, this is just for purebloods. So if you are a hybrid, your hybrid form is determined either by the person that bit you or the parent's form if you were born a lycan. And remember, if you are a hybrid, then only one of your parents was a lycan when you were conceived. So it's going to be whoever that parent was. So if you had a were-rat parent, you will be born a were-rat if you're born a hybrid. Now, that being said, there are other lycans down in the Undercity besides were-rats. Like, someone started as a werewolf, and I was like, yeah, go ahead, you can start, and we'll just say you came up from the Undercity, and you're a pureblood because they were born that way. So it's possible that right now in the Undercity, it's not just possible, but it is a fact that right now in the Undercity, there are were-tigers walking around who were born to two were-rat parents, and it just so happens that they had a higher charisma than a dex. Most of the folk who are in the Undercity are were-rats, both because there's a lot of hybrids, and then also just because it kind of just genetically happens that way. You have a high dex, your mom has a high dex, your grandpa has a high dex. It gets passed down in the family sometimes, those sorts of things. So there are other pure-blooded forms of lycans down in the Undercity right now, besides just were-rats. Were-rats just make up so much of the population proportionally that it's basically just were-rat city. Yeah. So that's a little bit more about the different forms, right? So there are those different kinds of lycanthropy between purebloods versus there being a hybrid. But then there's also, if you are, whether you're a pureblood or a hybrid, you can be any of these, right? And that is determined, if you're a pureblood, by your highest ability score at birth, or I guess when you enter adulthood, what it's going to be. Or if you're a hybrid, by the race of the person who bit or helped conceive you. So that's a little bit more about the kinds of lycanthropy. And now finally we're going to dive into this last question here, which is, where do they live? We already went over a little bit. Let me just adjust my screen shares here. We already went over a little bit kind of where they originally were from. Move this. Oh, come on now. Move this out of here. There we go. Whoa, that is quite large, isn't it? So we already talked about a little bit that they were from this kind of north-south stretch here between these Grantier Mountains going down to about the Calic Mountains and Honua Mana. That's still the case for probably most wares. Most lycans, I would say 60%, so that's most, right? I'd say 60% of lichens in all of Atheros live in or around the Horseshoe Plains. So either in the Borkdom, a lot of them might have moved over here to the Grand Covenant when they were invited over there during kind of like a big resettling a couple hundred years ago. And there's probably a small smattering of them in the Empire, although because of the Empire's extreme social control, there probably aren't many. If they are, they might be like, an Imperial Lord in Sword has a pet lichen that he uses as a gladiator, that sort of thing. But not many running around free. And then as far as kind of like the rest of the continent, there's probably not many among the Sonari, because again, they're such a heavily socially controlled area. And probably also not many among the Vahi, just because they're a bit distant, though they're a little further away. But the Mer, I would honestly think that because the Mer, they favor Luna as well, they might be kind of on the same side with a lot of other lycanthropes, thinking, hey, this isn't a curse, it's a blessing. I mean, they're shifters themselves. So I would say that the Mer, they probably, they might not be going around like sticking their throats out in front of lichens like, bite me, please. But they would at least be welcoming of lichens. There's no laws probably against lycanthropy the way that there are certainly in the Empire, and then probably in other smaller municipalities too. I would say that probably in Foundrin, where lycanthropy is strong, and especially the veneration of the wolf and the bear, I would say that open lycanthropy is probably still illegal. You can't, because there's no way that you can really guarantee your control over that form. That's why it's so respectable when you find someone who is a lichen who who has that control over it, because it's so atypical and it's so abnormal. Most of the time it's you go into a bloodthirsty rage once a month and you kill and murder everyone around you without any thought to them or who they are. Just taking on whatever these aspects of this race are. And kill and murder, that's maybe a wolf, right? Or a bear. If you're a were-boar, you might go on a rampage destroying a bunch of buildings. If you're a were-rat, you might go around cheating and stealing from all your friends, So there's different things. If you're a were-owl, you might do these weird plotting things against people and try to overthrow sorts of things, like that time at midnight on the new moon, that's when your plan springs into action or whatever, so it's uncommon. In fact, rare. It's incredibly rare that they have this sort of control over themselves during the new moon. That's typically why they either live in these small cloistered communities like the Undercity, or they lock themselves in the basement on that day because they know what goes on, and they just try to have a good reputation around town and hope that nobody finds out or puts together like, where were they on the last new moon? Kind of odd that they're always gone, isn't it? Oh, interesting. I guess full moon. Sorry, the full moon or new moon. New moon, yeah. But yeah, so just one of those things. They live all over, predominantly in the Horseshoe Plains, and they are pretty much unwelcome in most public societies, with perhaps the exception of the Mer. Even Revax in the Abhan Rainforest, where they venerate vampirism, they probably aren't really on board with lycanthropy, just because it's so bestial and dirty. It's like what the Ezron do, right? Running around in the jungle, you gross. Yeah, it turns you into a mammal too. Ugh, gross. Why would you revert in evolution from a supreme, unfeeling lizard being to a mammal? Ugh, with all that hair and emotions and soft skin? Gross. So yeah, the Nator probably aren't huge fans of lycanthropy. They're more into vampirism and magic. So we're at the 30-minute mark here for this lore talk, And I'm actually going to wrap it up right here because I think 30 minutes is good for a lore chat. It means people will actually go back and listen to it later, maybe. So we're going to wrap it up right here. Hope everybody has a good day and a good week. And next week, we will talk about Underdark races. Unless anybody has a really pressing request, send me a message if there's something that you just have to know about next Saturday. And I will maybe make it the topic of the lore call. Or maybe we'll just try to squeeze it in somewhere. But that's been today's lore call, all about lycanthropy. Hope you guys had a good time, and I'll see you on the server. Happy leveling.